for inviting me to this forum. I've learned a lot in the last day and a half. I don't usually do predictions, but I do have a prediction that all you're talking about in ICT and greenhouse gas reductions and energy will fail to deliver, to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference in the climate system. So we're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have strategies for adaptation that scale beyond every single person understanding all the aspects of a changing world that they're faced with. Like a previous speaker, Jim, I find some of the core messages already delivered, so I will focus quite strongly on some of the experiences that we have in our group. We take adaptation as a social and institutional process. I cannot provide any information to anybody in the world that will guarantee that in the year 2050, they or their systems or their societies and economies or children will be free from climate change impacts. So adaptation is a process of learning by doing, pilot testing, experimenting, comparing, having the capacity, you'll see I'm moving backwards through my chain there, to make decisions about balances between risk and exposure, between what you can do and invest in now and what you would be able to do, sunk costs and wasted investment in the future, and targeting those decisions around the information that we do have. Our core principle in the collective that I represent somewhat informally at the moment is that the value of information, the value of these huge data streams that are coming online, is in reducing uncertainty and making a decision, not in knowing all the risks or knowing what everybody is doing and creating an optimal decision about a stream of impacts or technological changes or vulnerability changes in the future. A few case studies. This is one I like. The AWARE company is a small group in the US looking for that breakthrough. They developed some quite innovative geospatial techniques, but around a model of providing value to users in making decisions. So they're not trying to be an ArcInfo or be a global private company representing the global Earth observing system or the Earth System Science Partnership, but to provide locational intelligence that helps you make a decision. We license their software. We give it free through them to any users in developing countries and provide that baseline vulnerability assessment. It's actually very easy to do, to get a sense of where people are vulnerable, what their resource base looks like, what the climate surfaces look like, and how those might be changing. An example of information being packaged to make decisions rather than simply let users try to capture all the information that's globally available and make some intelligent choices out of that. We've done a lot of training courses on this stuff, and you might be surprised, but then again, maybe you know this. It's difficult to get people to make decisions around complex data sets. This is another example from them. They've got an online web server looking at malaria, and it's updated every day with the weather information from global observing systems, and then users can log in, record the observed distribution of outbreaks, and try to get just a little bit ahead of the curve of when a malaria outbreak just blossoms, and hopefully be in place, anticipating, possibly using seasonal climate forecasts, the ability to intervene before they become epidemics. And there are lots of intervention strategies that you can do, but you have to have a health system, and in Africa that is a stumbling block, that can provide mosquito nets, can provide the right treatments, can get doctors networking so they know when an outbreak is coming. One of the big things we're doing is to provide information on long-range climate change to users. The core archive we have is actually at the University of Cape Town. It has all of the existing climate change scenarios archived by the IPCC, and we're providing a service where users can get that information downscaled to stations in their countries, in the communities that they're working with. That's the map of stations we've got licensed, and then get a sense of the envelope of future change. The goal at the end of the day, like in your Google desktop, you have the weather forecast for Oxford, not so great today. What about the seasonal climate forecast? We're not doing that ourselves, and that's the 3-month forecast. And then what about the sense of a trend of climate where you are, and an outlook in the sense of an envelope of future change over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? That's the kind of information you shouldn't search for. And when you find it, it should be reliable. It should be presented in a way that captures the uncertainty. I'm not a climatologist, but we have some very serious climatologists. One of their propositions, I call it the Stainforth proposition, is the only possible outcome of a new climate scenario now is to increase the range of uncertainty. Climate change is not about predicting the future, having forecasts that are probabilistic in the way we do with weather, but about dealing with that uncertainty. And that's a role both of ICT in providing that access to information, but also a user expert community that understands risk and decisions and responses. This is one I love. I only heard it last month from a guy in Thailand. He had a private company buy him 300 automated weather stations deployed in Thailand, and that density is higher than the WMO recommended density, so it's a Class A system. It's independent of the Thai weather service, and that's important. The stations report automatically to a website. Any user can get the data anytime they want at the original resolution. His group, which is ministerial but outside the Met Office, provide added value in the sense they charge users for packages that are information, mostly hydrological forecasts for river basins and for communities. That cost about $500,000. So a modest-sized country could actually develop monitoring streams that are useful and provide them to users for very low cost, considering the exposure and the consequences. We have a platform called weadapt.org. There's a wiki behind it. This is getting into the capacity building. A wiki is just a wiki. We have about 200 users registered, about 300 articles archived, somewhat unstructured. We need to do a lot of work providing a user service, but the concept of developing best practice in a field, climate adaptation, that has no best practice. It is changing. New information, new experiences, learning by doing, requires a very adaptive community itself in building capacity. Wiki, what we've got, I call beta. What we're looking at would be version 2. And this is a map from my Japanese postdoc of a social networking adaptation site where you would have databases of methodologies people have used and outcomes people have come with. And frankly, 90% of the information on adaptation that people need is just to copy what somebody else is doing that works. Somebody they trust, somebody they like, a situation that's similar to them. And it's possible with this kind of ICT infrastructure, if you have the social mobilization, to actually very quickly learn from each other. This is one I really love, and I don't know a lot about it. I was talking to Paul over there from Accountability, who knows quite a bit more about it. Vodafone in the UK, who own 30% of Safaricom in Kenya, launched about a year ago a scheme to transfer money through SMS, through text messaging. From the start, they've got, I think, 2 or 3 billion shillings. Okay, it's not all that much. They're running about 100,000 pounds a day at the moment in very small transfers, 100 shillings, 200, 1,000, up to 50,000, I think is the maximum, for about $1 a transfer. So low cost, instant, million users or more users who have Safaricom accounts than there are bank accounts. When I talk to others about this in the risk management business, it just, So I was talking to the head of the vulnerability mapping group in the World Food Program, and he said, we could target the vulnerable population before they suffer the asset stripping that happens in a famine. We could monitor transfers if the IPS will let us and know when that surge of extra payments are coming on stream, and that would replace our traditional sort of remote sensing and field-based observations to get a sense ahead of when the crisis becomes a loss of livelihood as opposed to just a little bit of extra money to buy food in. Climate protection, deploying full-scale risk management solutions targeted to the most vulnerable places, reaching the most vulnerable populations for the next 50 years. I don't know how that's going to work. It's a huge task. The upper estimate at the moment of the cost of that is something like $100 billion a year in around 2020, 2030. We've got to prepare for surprise. Everything's going to change. I don't really have a package ready for you on that. Some of the conclusions from particularly the Spider group in Sweden. I had a meeting last month on this, and somebody mentioned this earlier. This kind of technical change will have winners and losers. There'll be co-benefits and some shift in economies and companies and strategies. There are traditional credit mechanisms that work in some countries, particularly India, that this kind of commercial venture microfinance would destroy. Certainly deploying ICT solutions, getting to maybe, a famous book coming around these days, the role of social entrepreneurs in navigating an adaptive transition in sustainable livelihoods. These are all going to be difficult. My take-home slide doesn't exist. I like that word, by the way. 2 points. We need scale-free adaptation strategies, things that don't require an intense investment on a per-person basis. And I think ICT is the only solution at the moment that can provide that with the proper institutional governance. Clearly, then, the public-private partnerships are going to be part of that. We hope there's a role for some of the work that we're doing.